All right, everyone. Why don't we begin? So good morning. I love seeing all the faces and names and knowing where we're all joining from this morning. So welcome from me here in my home in Golden, Colorado. And I love seeing all the different locations, North Carolina, New York City, kind of all over the place. Philippines, of course. So thank you for being here with us. I'm sorry, I have a little visitor joining me, of course, as luck would have it. So we are recording this session, and there's a couple of folks who will not be able to be with us this morning. So we'll make certain that we post this recorded video in the course materials. So just a little bit of context setting that I think will be important, knowing that everyone is in different places of their summer. Some are fully on summer vacation, and others are just getting ready to get started or running summer school or whatever might be the case there. So a little bit of context setting. First and most important, I hope that everyone's getting a breath this summer and getting a chance to reflect and to kind of rest and rejuvenate. It was really terrific to see so many of you at the colloquium in LA. Just a little bit of a reminder here again, and I guess pre-election and context setting. So our JSN summer masterclass is a collaborative effort between the Jesuit Schools Network and our colleagues at Educate Magis, and we are so thankful for them. The goal of our cohort experience is for our participants to master an important aspect of Jesuit education and then return to their respective schools to spread their learning in deliberate and strategic ways to their colleagues as determined by each of your settings. So in partnership today with Father Johnny Go and Grace Cully here, who's joining us, we look forward to kind of facilitating the conversations of our module 2 here this morning. And then we'll talk about next steps, and we'll talk about how we go back to our schools and our settings. We have about 55 or so educators from across the JSN who are joining us from roughly 30 or so schools. So it's really just an exciting touch point for all of us to get to connect. Again, as we get started, I would thank my colleagues, Father Johnny Go and his colleagues, Rita and Galvin and Gellert from Educate Magis. And I'll turn it over now to Father Go to get us started.
Thank you, Christine. Thank you for the welcome and the introduction. Hello to everyone. We're very happy to be part of this Zoom to check in with you. I missed the opportunity of meeting many of you at the colloquium because I couldn't make it for some reason. But anyway, as you know, the second module of the masterclass was all about reflection, which is a very important ingredient in Ignatian pedagogy. And we always talk about reflection. So we're hoping that from the 3 lectures that we offered in the module, you were able to think a little bit more about reflection. You were provoked into thinking about reflection and how you practice it in your classes. No? And so we're hoping that the ideas that we offered you will also help us get into some kind of discussion. So since I'm the one who's giving the lecture, I thought you might be sick of me by now. So I invited my colleague, Galvin, to facilitate our discussion today. So Galvin, take it away.
Thanks, Father Johnny. Hello, everyone. I've been reading the posts on Educate Magis, and again, much like in the past month, it's been great to hear about different contexts. No? So hearing about the reflections on the content, but also to hear about the different contexts that you're coming from. And I think that really enriches this course experience. So let me just share my screen. Right. So in preparing for today's session, we thought that we'd begin by starting with something that a lot of people seem to have resonated with, most especially as you read through that last discussion forum. A lot of people appreciated using the 3Ds that Father Johnny presented to us in the modules. So I thought that we'd start with a short exercise just to sink our teeth further into the Ds. One of the interesting things we found is that a lot of you shared quite compelling insights. And so we have chosen a couple of insights. So you will see some of your insights flashed on screen in a while. We will recognize you, of course, and we will try to sort of think about what makes these great insights. So obviously we chose a couple of insights that we felt were great insights, greatly designed insights or greatly chosen insights. But we thought that it would be great to just as a look back at the module for us to look at it together and to try to see what makes them great insights per se. So this is the first one. I hope that you can recognize your contribution if you contributed this. So this came from Christine. So hi, Christine. Thanks for posting this. So she shared this sample insight, and the context is she teaches a class on law and society. And one potential insight that might be fitting for this particular context might be something like this. Change is the law of life, and those who look only to the past or present are certain to miss the future, quoting JFK. So what we'd like to do is in the next few minutes, we'd just like to open the floor. If anyone would like to share with us what makes this insight compelling. If you were to, let's say, use Christine's insight here in a class on law and society, how do you think this insight might promote reflection? What is it about this insight that you think might be a great prompt to start with, let's say in a discussion, or a great an anchor point for a particular lesson? So I wouldn't want to steal the floor, and maybe we can hear from some. Does anyone want to chime in? Looking at this particular insight, what is it for you that makes it a compelling one? What is it for you that you think might open up reflection or allow or facilitate reflection among Christine's students? So you may want to use the Ds as anchor points, right? So is there a particular D that you can clearly recognize here? Greg, go ahead. Feel free to chime in.
Well, the thing that strikes me is that certain to miss the future. And if we're talking in deep diveable, what does it mean to miss the future? What does it mean to miss a time period? I think that would be engaging for students.
Thanks, Greg. Ryan, go ahead.
I think a related insight is that, those who don't learn from the past, are going to commit the same things in the future. And so it would be interesting to see what that means in this context, why we need to change from the past or change from the future. That would be something that I think it would be a deep dive kind of question, right?
Thanks, Ryan. Is there anyone else who'd like to chime in? I saw that I heard that Greg and Ryan jumped into the conversation using deep diveable as an anchor point. So if you'd like to use any of the other Ds as a way of trying to take a look at how this insight might facilitate reflection, that would be great. Any other thoughts on this? Anyone else would like to share their ideas? This is something that I think we need much in the Philippines. I don't know if you've been following the news in the Philippines, but we do need to have more conversations about history and how important it is to look back at the past and not just the present, and then not just the future. So I can imagine this in a Philippine classroom with a lot of debates among students, given our current context. So thanks again, Christine, for posting this. We'll look at a couple more insights. But before that, maybe we can ask Christine, when designing reflection, I think one of the important things that we might want to think about is how might coming up with an insight like this affect your teaching, or redirect your teaching, or drive how you might facilitate a conversation in your class. So Christine, since you posted this sample insight, what led you to share about this?
Looking at something that was debatable, defensible, deep diveable, a class on law and society is a senior class, and I love having the students interact and talk and lead where they want to go. It's an elective, so the nice thing about that is I can change it on the fly and what is important to them. So I picked this one because it would give me good insight to their thought process about history, about how history can affect laws, how history affects society. I just thought it could go a variety of different ways and would really lead to good discussion and some defensible, depending on a student's opinion or where they're coming from, would just would give us some good fodder to discuss and play devil's advocate on when they gave answers.
Thanks, Christine. So let's take a look at a couple more, just to appreciate some of the great insights posted in our discussion forum. This one is from Remy. I'm not so sure if Remy's around. No, he's not around with us today, but the context here is in a French class on the unit on Impressionist art movement. And the insight he presents is as follows: art challenges and reflects society. So maybe a scaffolding question that we might ask is, when we read this insight in the context of this particular lesson, which D stands out the most for you? Which D can you easily recognize by looking at the particular insight, making it a good insight that might be used in developing this lesson or facilitating a discussion on this particular unit? Does anyone want to chime in? So art challenges and reflects society. So which of the Ds can you recognize or do you think stands out in this particular insight? Christine, go ahead.
I think it's definitely debatable. Does art challenge and reflect society? So right there, you're going to get some answers of yes, no, maybe. So it'll start the conversation.
Thanks, Christine. Apart from it being debatable, I can also see how this can be defensible, right? Like that when you post such a thesis to students, you wouldn't want them to just share their opinions, but you'd want to make sure that they provide some evidence, they provide some justification for why they are presenting certain perspectives about this particular thesis. So let's take a look at one more, since Remy's not around. This is for an 11th grade course in ethics and Catholic social teaching. And the insight posted by Joshua was, the most obvious important realities are often the ones that are hardest to see and talk about. So again, what are some Ds that we can recognize here in this particular insight that might make it a compelling insight that can lead to reflection? So maybe we can hear from anyone in the room, and then we'll give Joshua the floor after hearing from someone else, so that he can also share a little bit about what led him to share about this insight.
I can appreciate a deeper dive on this one because there's a juxtaposition, the most obvious, hardest to see. So how can something be the most obvious and be the hardest to see? I think that could promote some further reflection.
Right. So the irony in the phrase might be something compelling to actually discuss with students. Joshua, would you mind cluing us in as to how you see this being a useful insight to lead to reflection in this particular course that you might be teaching?
Sure. This quote actually comes from the late philosopher David Foster Wallace in his piece, This is Water, a commencement speech he gave in 2005. And I use it at the beginning of a Catholic social teaching course as a way to invite students to consider the things the assumptions that they may have that they may not even realize. And that becomes an entry point to talk about some oftentimes very difficult, very provocative, very interesting for students, but also topics around which they have a lot of fear. So stepping into issues of class and race in particular, this opens the door in a very incremental way to suggest, hey, maybe there are some assumptions I'm making about myself and the world I live in without actually having given much thought to it. And so it puts them in a place where they can actually be reflective of their own experience without it being an accusation, but an invitation.
Thanks, Joshua. So thanks for everyone who shared about their thoughts on the insights presented today. In the module, Father Johnny presents a couple of different tips. The Ds became part of the module a few times in developing your insights and reflection questions. And then the module ends with these tips that we say that in designing reflection, ideally we design and scaffold it, we teach it and model it, and we aim for it and test it. So what we'd like to do right now is we'd like to send you off to your smaller groups, groups of 3 or 4 people. And we'd just like you to spend some time talking about 2 things. The first is based on what you've gotten from the module about designing reflection questions, designing insights, making reflection more part of your teaching. To what extent do you think are these suggestions useful in your particular context? So do you think you can use the suggestions in designing reflections in your classes? And in what concrete ways do you imagine being able to use them as you look at your own setting? And then do also carve out some space to talk about some other questions you may still have about the element of reflection in the IPP. So we're sending everyone to breakout rooms for 15 minutes, and then we'll come back together, not necessarily for reporting, but just like the last time we came together, just to hear some ideas, some thoughts, some questions that might have arisen during your discussions. So we'll send everyone to your breakout rooms now. Let me set the 15-minute timer, and we'll see everyone back here in 15 minutes. We hope you have a good conversation. Hey everyone, welcome back. I hope you had a good discussion within your groups. We'll just wait for all of the squares to come back over. There you go. All right. As always, we'd like to hear from you. Again, we won't go around for each group to report back things that you discussed, but were there some insights, questions, or ideas that emerged in your discussion that you'd like to share with a bigger group? So we'll just open the floor to have an open, free-flowing discussion with anyone who may want to share anything that came from their small group discussions. Go ahead, Lawrence. I see your hand up. Go ahead.
Yes. Something that I was bringing up toward the end of our time was getting an individual teacher, like one of us here. We clearly have an interest. We want to learn about reflection in Ignatian ways. How do you spread that to the rest of the school community, the other faculty? Because if you're the only one doing it, that's your gimmick. You know, I'm in Schulte's class, so okay, now we're gonna come in, we're gonna write. You know, it ends up being kind of a, you know, it's just kind of a goofy thing we do. But if it's institution wide, you know, that's what we are about. This Jesuit school, this is what we do. So you're no longer the outlier. It's something you and all of your peers as teachers do. But if you're working with people that are set in their ways, or I don't see how this would work, or, you know, I could be dissecting another frog in the time it takes to, you know, reflect, or I could be covering another poem. If the teachers don't see it as worthy, then it kind of takes away from what you do in your own class. You know, reflection is a goofy thing we do for Schulte because he told us to do it. Not it's an Ignatian thing, and this is what we'll be doing in all of our classes. And we have the examine every single day over the PA, which is great. Trying to do this kind of thing in every period, in every class, I can see as kind of being a monumental task.
Thanks, Lawrence. Maybe before we hear other thoughts on what Lawrence brought up, maybe we can invite our colleagues from JSN who you may want. Is there anything that you'd like to say regarding Lawrence's question? Anyone who'd like to chime in? I can see that. Christine, is there anything that you'd like to bring up in relation to that? Like, so Lawrence brought up a pretty good point about that speaks directly to what Christine mentioned in the beginning of today's session about the whole intention of these series of sessions of us bringing whatever it is that we feel worthwhile to bring back to our institutions, not just in our own classroom. So maybe we can hear some thoughts on this. Go ahead, Christine.
Sure. So Lawrence, as I listen to you, I think about it's this whole idea we're talking about of creating habits and creating a habit of reflection. So oftentimes I'll feel like, even kind of in my own work now, and certainly in my work over the course of years in schools, that sometimes reflection can be an extra, it can be an add-on, like if we have time for it, if we get to it, whatever it might be. But what we're talking about here, and actually kind of what this masterclass is modeling in our own work, is the idea of creating a habit of reflection that's worthy of our time, that's worthy of the time of our students and worthy of the time of busy teachers and educators. And I like that. I like thinking about that intentionality when we're designing reflection, and even those words, intentionality of designing reflection in our work. I mean, it fits no matter what context we are. It's the challenge of busy people and lots of time and other pressures and content to get through and to pour through that I think can also be worth some time thinking about. So that was what I heard as I was listening to your insights.
Sorry. So I was saying that as I was listening to Christine, one thing that came to mind was one of the things that was brought up in the last module on uncoverage. I don't know if you remember that. In a way, as we go into reflection, we also need to not just put it on top of everything that we're doing, but to allow it to flavor the existing things that we're doing. So I think that might be one perspective, that what if we see reflection not just as an additional thing on top of everything else that we're doing in the classroom. There are many things that we do in the classroom, but to think about how it might be infused in whatever it is that we're already doing, maybe replacing some things, or maybe reflection being used as a way to frame how we design our classes. Maybe just one more thing to respond to what Lawrence mentioned, that sometimes some of us might think that we need to do reflection every meeting for every session. And maybe that's not necessarily the case. For some, you could spend more time in reflection maybe towards the end of a unit, in the middle of a unit. So it need not necessarily be something that you do every particular meeting. But there was something that Lawrence brought up that maybe someone in the room may want to respond to, and that is the issue of how might we make reflection more part of a broader practice outside your own specific classrooms. So maybe there are some examples in the room that you'd like to share. Joshua, go ahead.
I think in our situation, we try to imagine curriculum, each unit focused around a particular question. So what's the essential question for this unit? And then reflection becomes much easier to work in the context of a unit versus the pressure of, well, I have to ask a question for a student to respond to each day, where then that roteness of the daily pressure of doing it doesn't actually invite reflection. I find it actually promotes reactions. And so thinking in terms of, what is the most important question a student needs to address in a unit, as opposed to what's all the content I'm going to give them and that they're going to regurgitate to me. That creates an avenue for reflection to be meaningful.
Thanks, Joshua. Greg, go ahead.
And I think we also have to help other teachers recognize the difference between content and impact. Because we're just content driven. Well, I've done my job because I've given them all the content. That's not educating. And so I think the thing that I'm getting out of this is that insight and reflection has the teacher focus on what is the impact of what I'm doing with my students. It's not enough just to give them the content. Is that content relevant, reflective, engaging, causing growth?
Thanks, Greg. I see a couple more hands, so let's hear from Meg and then Russ.
I was just thinking about something that I've heard Bill Daggett say a lot, which is that relevance makes rigor possible. And we talk a lot in Jesuit schools about a rigorous education, but I feel like the connecting bridge that insights can be is bringing relevance to what we do, like the big why. And I think our students love to ask that question, like, why are we doing this? Why do we have to study grammar? This is dumb. And reflection can help students make those connections to relevance, which then will hopefully inspire them to want to engage in the rigorous thinking that we're asking them to do.
Thanks, Meg. Russ, go ahead.
Yeah, so Greg Allen and I we worked together, and he was just talking about impact over content, and I would consider myself a skills-based educator, a learner-centered educator. Do a lot of project-based stuff. I'm wondering, like, and maybe I thought I saw this somewhere where like insights are prioritized content, right? So I'm trying to negotiate like how insights fit into a more skill-based, learner-centered environment. It's kind of open-ended, but I think that's a worthy question. How does that look like? What does that look like in a curriculum map? For instance, are those like the key understandings? And then how do those? What is the relationship between those key understandings or essential ideas and the skills, the outcomes, right, that you're aiming for?
Rita, would you like to respond to that? Or Father Johnny, go ahead, Father.
Yeah, that's a great question, no? And I think one of the big ideas of the masterclass is that we need to be more purposeful, more intentional about designing reflection. And one of the reasons is that once we have a target insight, it helps us, as Russ said, prioritize content. We know which ones to, which there's a lot of content, right? And somebody just said earlier that, education isn't just giving content. So we need to be able to prioritize content, to select content, and having an insight, designing the reflection helps us do that, no? The insight sort of becomes a criterion for choosing what kind of content we're going to prioritize. But Russ also asked, what about the skills, no? For a learner to be able to apply what he or she has learned in a competent way, it's important that the application is guided by understanding. No? So the insight actually aids the application. No, so you won't be able to really use what you've learned unless you understand the basic insights there. So I think when Ross was asking where would it look like in a curriculum map, I guess it should be part of the learning outcomes. If you're familiar with UBD, Understanding by Design, will be the essential understandings basically, So I don't know, Ross, if that's helpful.
Thanks, Father. I see Sarah's hand up. Go ahead, Sarah.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, it kind of goes along with this, but even when we're providing the insight, we talked a little bit in our group, what is the background of this insight, especially, so we had two different insights shared. I'm not sure the one about art and challenges reflect society, but both of those are white males. And so are we sharing, are we being diverse in sharing these different insights? And if not, what are we talking about? What is this person's background? Are we making that part of the discussion with our students and providing some context? So I think that we're providing, a voice that's not always at the table.
Thanks, Sarah. And I think there's something that came to mind in relation to what Sarah mentioned, that in the module we talk about different kinds of insights, right? Like personal insights that also try to point back to the person. So maybe the conceptual insights are things that more easily come to mind as experts in our specific fields, but then paying attention to those personal insights that point back to the individuals are worthwhile to think about as well. Rita, go ahead.
I also just wanted to share, Joshua was saying that an essential question for the entire unit might be one way to do it. And I just like to say that I agree with that suggestion, because then when you design the unit as a whole, you're thinking about something important, a big idea, whether it's an essential understanding, an insight. Father said it would be essential understanding in a UBD framework, a target insight, and a big question. So that could frame and focus your unit so that your reflection need not be asking a reflection question and having them write an answer. Your reflection could be some provocative experience, like a Socratic seminar or a concept mapping, and that would be your reflection activity. And one way that you might enroll other teachers into that is to name and notice it as a reflection activity. So the conversation might be, what are the reflection activities that they're already doing in their classes? Because I'm very sure that they are, especially if we use the 3 kinds of reflection questions that were, or reflection activities that were mentioned in the module. So that, the other thing I wanted to just point out is to give them time to debate it or to go on a deep dive, because as Sarah said, you want to surface other perspectives. And that takes time. It takes time for that to surface.
Thanks, Rita. Christine, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm wondering, as Sarah said, I mean, being a history teacher and a social studies teacher, I could see it in other classes too. Giving an insight might be a great way to bring in varying viewpoints and different voices that haven't been heard. As she was saying, the examples were white males, but yes, there's others out there. So during different times of history or different interpretations on religion or art or whatever, can you use those insights to help your students see different? So not only are you reflecting, but you're also showing a different insight. And how do the students wrestle with that? Could you use it that way?
Thank you. Let's hear from Ryan.
I just wanted to respond to Russ's comment about, when you have a more skills-based situation, how do you reflect? As an engineering and science guy, sometimes the reflection isn't this giant metaphysical question of right and wrong and good and bad and spiritual. Sometimes one of our reflections is, we've done something 3 different ways using 3 different tools and 3 different techniques. Which way is going to be the best in a certain context, and have them look at that. Sometimes it could be different pathways. Students sometimes come at math problems in different directions. Which way works best for you and why? Which way would work best in which context? Which tool is best in which context? And sometimes those can lead to reflections, as Father Go mentioned in his module. Sometimes the reflection has to be grounded in the academic discipline that you're talking about, and you don't have to worry about trying to get it to some super large question. That said, sometimes in engineering, we get to that. We talk about prosthetics. Why are you building that way? Are you thinking about the person that you're building for and not just what you want to do? So there are larger questions you can get at in a STEM skills-based, very, kind of rote subject matter where reflection is warranted.
Thanks, Ryan. I see Stefano's hand up. Go ahead.
Thank you. Yes, Ryan, continuing what you were saying, how important it is for science, for example, to find an overarching insight or overarching question that can help students understand why are we studying something. Or that could be a personal insight. How do I use, as we were saying with Tim and Susie, how do I use malleability for metal? So, and then, maybe we can see that every aluminum can, or how was it formed, how much engineering is behind it, how much energy has been spent. So that reflection is essential. It shift the class from some notion to why are we doing this and why this happens. So thanks again.
Thanks, Stefano. See, Russ has his hand up. Go ahead, Russ.
Yeah, just a few more things, and kind of stepping back even further, and thinking about design. I could see if I was to go back to my syllabi or my curriculum map, and I was to start adding these insights, right, to kind of anchor the course. I wonder if framing or organizing the insights for a given course, using the UAPs as a way of organizing those insights. And further aligning ourselves with those lodestars, right? The other thing it just came to me, like there was a question a while back about how do we, kind of implement this thing on a broader scale. One of the things that I think I'm curious about, and again, I'm working with a few other people at Jesuit High School on a strategy, on a plan. I'm wondering what if classroom observations, and developing. So obviously, we're all kind of training to become coaches of sorts. What do the rubrics look like? If we coaches or trainers or whatever we're called were to go into classrooms and begin to observe, teachers working on for instance, like reflection. What do those rubrics look like? So that's a question that's kind of enduring for me, right now. So just throw that out there to the group as well.
That's a great question. Is there someone who would like to share some insights, some ideas on that question? So what should we look for if we were to observe a classroom for reflection? What are some things that you will look for? I'd also rephrase the question though, and maybe say, who will you look at as you observe a classroom for reflection? Because I think as what the module also tried to drive home, that in as much as we can frame potential insights, we'd like to be able to draw them from the students, right? So what I'd say is that maybe whatever that rubric might look like should be we should be observing more the students than the teachers, right? I mean, of course, we may be observing how the teachers prompt reflection from the students, but the prompting of the reflection is just a means towards the ends of students actually making the reflection. So what I'd say there might be something like for you to check the kind of reflections that you hear from students, because I think at the end of the day, that speaks to something that was brought up earlier, that speaks to the impact that we are hoping for. Rita, I saw you unmute. There's something you want to add?
Yeah, I was just going to say what you were going to say, that it would be to look at what students are doing, what kind of thinking are they able to, you can use the 3Ds maybe, are they able to debate, deep dive, and defend their positions well. So the 3Ds also provide a very, provide very good criteria for a rubric. The other thing I'd like to add is maybe the idea of giving them enough time to revisit, rethink, and refine. So understanding and insights take time to evolve, so if you were to have a target insight for an entire unit, you can revisit it in different ways, maybe in higher with more deepening as throughout the unit. And if you do it throughout the unit, it need not take so much time.
Thanks, Rita. Father Johnny?
I just want to quickly add, I think what Russ is proposing is a worthwhile enterprise if the school wants to go there, no? But in terms of the rubric, apart from those that have been mentioned, if we recall, the point of having reflection is to engage the students. So I think the level of engagement of the students could be one of the criteria in the rubric that you might want to develop when you want to assess how reflection is implemented in the classroom.
Thanks, Father. I think we're near reaching time. So thank you very much for all of the ideas that's been shared and the conversations that we've had today. Hopefully it's helped you dig more deeper into the task of designing reflection for your specific courses and classes. So we're turning it over back to Christine for maybe some reminders and to close today's session.
Sure. Thank you, Galvin. So like many of you, I was writing down notes as I was listening and hearing the insights of all of you, writing down notes that struck me as meaningful as and important. So I'll conclude with some of them and then kind of our next steps. So thinking about designing for empathy and engagement. Some of the interesting thoughts that struck a chord with me. So this idea of creating habits, I love that. Creating habits in our work, in this case, habits of reflection, not as an add-on, so not as an appendix or an extra, but as part of our work. Being purposeful and intentional about designing for reflection. In our small group, one of our colleagues made the connection, for those of you that were at our colloquium in LA, about the spiritual conversations, experiences that we had. And so again, being intentional and creating space. As Stefano and Ryan said, you know, it's not always about the giant, big, fancy questions. It can be about something simple. What works best and why? And sometimes it's through those simple questions that you can get at kind of the larger stuff. I loved the idea of offering an opportunity to provide voices that are not at the table, and thinking about reflection in that way. That seems so powerful to me. The idea of all of us being facilitators and designers in our work. Isn't that a great reminder as we're so busy and we get, you know, so kind of caught up in everything that we have to do? We are designers, we are facilitators. I love the creativity there. The difference between content and impact. That was a powerful thought to me. I loved the quote, relevance makes rigor possible. And so how does, within relevance makes rigor possible, where's the interplay of reflection? And so much more. What do rubrics look like in creating time, et cetera? But those are some concluding thoughts of the ideas that I think came across here. If we can just take a second to step back from what we're doing here and kind of take the 30,000 foot view, right, of this is the pilot experience of this masterclass. So think of the gift here on a Wednesday morning for me, a Wednesday night for Galvin and Johnny and everyone else in between. But here we are, Wednesday morning in the summertime in July. All of you have said yes to this experience, which is one big experience of reflection in each of our work, and how powerful that is in our desire to cultivate reflective practitioners across the JSN, and thinking about all the different settings and the different roles that all of us have here in this group, how we really are deepening the mission of our work. Again, that's quite powerful to me. We're doing it through a way that's supportive of our own professional growth. So taking some time to step back and think on these issues, something that probably we don't do enough of through the course of our regular school year. So it's our own professional growth, but it also, of course, will bleed back into the community. I'm really struck by the creativity involved in this, and I find that inspiring. And then, as Rita said, and as the course modules urge us to do, crafting time to revisit, to rethink, and to refine. That's really what we're doing here in this masterclass. And so our charge over the next couple of months will be to think about, so we're doing this for ourselves in this experience. How do we bring this back to all of the schools that you hail from? And I think that's an exciting challenge that I would pose for each of us to be thinking about. So we'll move into, in the month of July, to the module 3, which is designing for excellence and empowerment. And if I'm right, Father Johnny, there's 4 lessons in there, and Gellert, our Educate Majas colleagues, will open that for us so we all have access to that module 3. We'll meet again as planned. And again, these opportunities for virtual connection are just that, an opportunity for connection and to remind us that we're part of something bigger than our own world. But we'll meet on August 9th, same time, same place, right? You've got the links, 10:30 Eastern. What we'll talk about then, in addition to kind of a similar experiment or similar experience of the new module, we'll begin to really ask you to think about, so how are you going to bring this experience back to your schools? So it's a real powerful, I like thinking about it. You know, you hail from roughly 30 or so schools. So how will those 30 or so schools be changed by this experience of what we're all engaging here on a Wednesday morning in July? What we're going to think about doing is reconvening this group at some point in the fall, likely in October, and have an opportunity to share. So we did this master class with the IPP over the summer. What are we doing? How are we bringing it back to our setting? So we'll talk about that. But I plant that seed now because I'm a planner and I like to have something in my mind about, so that will encourage me to think about how am I moving this learning beyond my own self, my own mind to our schools. So again, thank you for being here. We are grateful for your time. We are grateful that you said yes for this. We will look forward to seeing you all on August 9th and then figuring out where we go from there. In the meantime, I hope the summer days are long and your rest and rejuvenation is deep as well. So thank you to everyone for the time. Thank you especially to Galvin for our facilitation this morning.